The last part of chapter 3 dealt with fertilization of plants, and in chapter 4 we'll just be focusing a little bit more on the reproduction process of plants. This is important because reproduction causes the daughter generation of plants to be formed. And in this whole reproduction name that we give to what happens to plants, there's actually a differentiation between two concepts. The first is what is called propagation, and the second is plant reproduction. Now, let's start off by reproduction because the plant fertilization cycle is fresh in your minds. And reproduction is basically where the characteristics of the parent plant is transferred by gametes. So through the process of meiosis, where there is fertilization that must take place, a seed is formed. So plant reproduction causes the formation of seeds. So if we look at this picture down below, hopefully you recognize this from the last part of chapter 3 that dealt with fertilization and pollination. Pollination, firstly, the pollen lands on the stigma of the pistil. The pollen tube or the pollen germinates. The pollen tube grows down in the style until it reaches the ovary. And in the ovary, one sperm cell fuses with the ovum or the egg cell and the other with the polar nuclei. And in this fusion, a seed is formed. And that seed germinates to give a plant that looks exactly the same as the mother plants. But the reproduction is the fertilization must take place. This is important because most of our food crops in the world are actually seeds. So if fertilization, plant reproduction did not take place, we would not have food to eat. So in the first case, this is wheat. This is a seed, and that seed was formed through the process of reproduction, the fusion of a male and a female gamete. This is corn. The corn kernel is actually a fruit, but inside the fruit is the seed. And the same thing, for that seed to have formed, there was a fusion of male and female gametes. And the same with rice. I don't know how many of you have ever seen rice that's still inside the husks. And the seed inside this fruit, with the same plant reproduction thing happening, there was a fusion of male and female gametes. I had a question last year about whether rice would grow if you take tastic rice from the shop and you planted it. The question there is probably not, because the rice has gone through a lot of processing before it actually gets to the supermarket. So, but if you have fresh rice like this and you plant it, it would most definitely grow. You also need to know about the properties of good agricultural seed. So if you go to the Co-op and you buy something like lucerne seed, for example, that seed needs to adhere to some qualities for it to be good agricultural seed. And the first thing is that it needs to be pure and true to type. What that means is that if you buy a bag of lucerne seed and you open the bag, there must only be lucerne seed in that bag. It must be true to type. There shouldn't be weed seeds in there as well. And then also it should be clean. It should only be seed. There shouldn't be any chaff or sticks or leaves or anything in that seed. It must be clean. The seeds must be well developed. They must be dry and uniform. So because as soon as seed take up water through the micropyle, it starts to germinate. So as long as the seed is dry, germination will not start to happen. And the last thing is that seed should be viable and retain its vigor. What that means, viable means, is if you buy seed from the Co-op and you plant it, you know that it will grow. And retain its vigor is that when you buy the seed from the Co-op, you can store it for a year, for example, and then plant it and it will still grow. So these are the properties of good agricultural seed. My question to you is, after hearing the previous slide, is if I give you two batches of seed, one looking like this and one looking like this, which is the seed that you would prefer to plant as a farmer? And I hope you set the seed on this side because you can see it's dry. They're uniform, they all look the same. There's no impurities, it's clean. And this seed most definitely will germinate if you plant it. If you plant this seed, there's already seed that is germinated already. So if you plant this, it will not germinate again. And you can see there's impurities, there's parts of a leaf. So this is impure agricultural seed. If you buy seed like this, your crop will most definitely fail. You also need to know about the process of seed germination. So what happens after you've planted seeds? And germination is basically the resumption of active growth by the embryo, and it leads to the rupture of the testa and the emergence of a young plant. So if you think back about the structure of a seed, the testa is the seed coat on the outside of the seed. So as soon as water is taken up by the seed, that testa or that seed coat ruptures and a young plant will emerge. Firstly, the radicle will emerge, the little root, first root of a plant, and then the plumule, which is the first leaves of a plant. So seed germination happens in three processes. The first one, or phases, the first one is the absorption of water by the seed through the micropyle, and that is called imbibition. And that absorption of water causes the testa to rupture or the seed coat to rupture. After the seed coat has ruptured, respiration within the seed starts. And respiration is the release of energy for growth. So that energy for initial growth is released through that first respiration process. And after initial growth has started, the enzymes will be activated inside the seed, and the absorbed or the food in the cotyledons will start to be absorbed, and that radicle and plumule will then start to grow. And as soon as the radicle and the plumule grow, the seedling will emerge above the ground, and when the first green leaves form, photosynthesis will start. The second type of reproduction process that happens in plants, remember the first one is actual plant reproduction, the fusion of a male and a female gamete. The second type is called propagation, and propagation is basically the reforming or recomposition of an entire plant from a part of the parent plant. So there's no fusion of a male and a female gamete. There's no fertilization. This process of propagation happens purely through mitosis. And that is basically where you take a part of a plant and you put it either in soil or in water for that plant to grow further and form a daughter plant that looks exactly the same as the mother plant. And that is mostly done through plant cuttings. There are some advantages of this vegetative propagation. If you don't have seed and if you only take cuttings, the first thing is that you will ensure survival of those plants. So if you sow seed, there might be a chance that some of that seed don't germinate, and you're not sure of the crop that you will have after seed germination. When you plant cuttings and you look after them, you are ensured of that plant survival. The cuttings that you plant or that you take, you are uniform with the properties of the mother plant. So if you take cuttings from a strong, mature mother plant, you are sure that the cuttings that you make have characteristics that's uniform with the properties of that mother plant. As you can see in this picture, this is a mother plant, a leaf, and there are seedlings that develop from, or daughter plants that develop from that leaf. So these cuttings or these daughter plants, they develop from mature tissue. So it's not young tissue that still needs to be differentiated and to grow. Under normal circumstances, if you make cuttings, you are ensured a higher yield because the cuttings are normally taken from strong plants, so you are sure that those plants will provide a crop. Just to show you another picture of 2 cuttings, you can see that it was only 2 cuttings of a leaf that was made. And if you remember about the morphology of plant leaves, these cuttings will grow because they're still a part of the stem. And remember, between the stem and the leaf is an axillary bud. So there's an axillary bud, and an axillary bud is meristematic tissue, which is growth tissue. So this plant will start to grow from that axillary bud in that axil between the stem and the leaf. The leaf is still present here. The reason why it wasn't cut off here is because while it is still green, it also photosynthesizes. So during that process, energy and sugars are produced. If you take away that leaf, no energy will be provided for new growth to start. This is another example of propagation. This is a plant which is called Mother of Thousands. It is a succulent which on the edge of the leaves form daughter plants. Yeah, and you can see here that is a daughter plant. It already has roots, it already has leaves. This was through the process of mitosis. So each of these daughter plants have got exactly the same characteristics as the mother plant. There was no fusion of male and female gametes. No seeds were formed. This is used commonly in agriculture. Propagation is used for crops such as bananas. I've mentioned it before when we looked at fruits, is that bananas do not have seeds. And because they do not have seeds, the banana plants can't be grown from seeds. So seed or daughter plants or cuttings from the banana plants needs to be made so that we can have banana crops in the future. The most common agricultural way in using cuttings is through 2 processes, the one called grafting and the other one budding. Grafting is basically where you take a cutting and you plant it onto another mother plant. And I'll show you a video clip just now about how it works. Budding is where you take the axillary bud, you cut that out from the daughter plant, and you plant it onto a rootstock or a mother plant. This has been taken to the extreme in some parts of the world where they sell what is called fruit salad trees. And through the process of grafting and budding, they take a rootstock or a mother plant and they plant different types of fruit onto that one plant. You cannot plant pears onto citrus, for example, but you can plant or graft 2 different types of apples on the same tree. You can see here all the different bloom colors are different types of apples in this case. You can also do it with stone fruit. These are prunes and plums on one tree. And then you can also do it with citrus fruit, where you can use, for example, an orange tree as a rootstock, and you can plant a lemon tree and a lime tree onto that rootstock.